Hello everyone and welcome to H633. I'm recording this, we are saying today the 31st of October, and it's once more a lovely day, and today we even have sunshine. Hard to beat, what a day. And I feel the sun warming my skin. It's a beautiful feeling. And this sensation makes me relaxed. And I think the sun is a very important thing in our lives, and it is slowly disappearing now in November. And we are entering another era, the autumn. And I'd say autumn brings another mind, another way of thinking. It's more reflective, it's slower, but it can also be much deeper. And I think these aspects of thinking the different seasons are incredibly important. We do tend to think differently in this era, and we should take advantage of it to make the more thorough, more embodied knowledge. This is not a criticism of the summer mentality, but they are different quality-like. And both have the benefits and the downfalls. But the deeper thinking is also the changing thinking. I find it very hard to believe that we will change in summer, but that's the growing part. And what is growing in summer is something that laid a seed in spring. And we are now in the autumn laying seed for the next season, for it to blossom. And then we need to turn the earth, go deeper, to put the seed to have a nice harvest next year. This time is the time to change what is underneath. You could say the implicit. And this as an entry, I'm quite sure you can guess it's going to be a rather difficult lecture. I will go into one of the most difficult aspects, both in Heidegger and in David Bohm, and that is the position of contradictions. Or you might say polarities, like the polarity between subject and object. And you should always go back to that, because every time you go back to it, you will find new things. But it's a tough nut to crack. It's tough to work with. You will first have a superficial understanding of it, as you always do. That's absolutely natural and should be that way, no other way. And that will, by time, deepen, getting more and more implicit. So, although I didn't learn about David Bohm until the very end of summer, there are some people that call the passing October we had, almost finished, little summer. And I got a shallow understanding of David Bohm. I got an understanding that will be wrong also. I know that already. But what parts will be wrong? Of course I don't know. This is the deepening of the knowledge. And it's not only about being completely correct or completely wrong. It's a whole scale. And think about this level, the two different levels, also difference in depth. And I think it's a better tool or way of working with the things that we usually only have as contradictions. You can see contradiction as a simpler tool, that you generalize maybe a little bit too much in some cases especially. Whereas level of depth is something more demanding, and it also takes that you got your body inside of it. It needs to be more implicit. One could say, be careful here, but one could say that explicit is more like contradictions, and levels are more implicit. Explicit could be contradictions, and implicit could be more levels. But that is a very, very crude exaggeration. But it will help pedagogically to get into the right part of the tennis court. Now, we discussed contradictions before together with Graham Priest, and it has also been mentioned as an important trait to deal with when it comes to chaos theory. And what you notice in Graham Priest is he says contradictions are made too weak in ordinary logic. When you really need the contradictions, that won't work because you misuse the system somehow, or you're being sloppy. Some things are true contradictions. Some things are on the opposing scale or different polarities. An easy one that's not a contradiction, which you directly understand, is hot and cold. They are two different properties, and that you can learn already from ordinary classical physical chemistry. But sometimes you can get lured into that they are true contradictions. That can be used as a metaphor for contradiction. I think we've done that with temperature. -1 and a +1 equals 0. And in 0 you have the totality. That's quite all right. Another thing that most people know is not a true contradiction is black and white. But it works as a metaphor for other things. And now we come to a more trickier part. Right, as in morally right, is not the opposite of morally wrong. I think there's a joking tell here that 2 wrongs doesn't make a right. And although it's an everyday idiom, it points to something. But in some cases, something I tried also to use in my own life, to do good stuff to sort of equal bad stuff one has done earlier on. There you have a contradictive property somehow. And particle and wave are not opposites either. And I think that's a trickier one. It's really easy to see the whole world needs to be either wave or particle, and there's an opposing couple there. They are opposing in many ways actually, but they're not true contradiction to every property, but a lot. One trait they have is, which they share a contradiction, is they are the 2 most different things in the universe. Nothing can get more apart from each other than a wave in a particle. And initially, the particle is much easier to understand than the wave, because the wave we're talking about in quantum physics can only be understood mathematically, whereas a particle you can have some dim conception of what it could be, at least from the beginning. That will change after a while. In the end, when you get more knowledge of what a wave could be, you see everything is not completely clear what a particle is. But it goes that way. And I think this is a property of the implicit, why we think and why the particle is easier. We need to adapt to this, not start with the wave. And you can end up with a lot of confusions. Many people think the wave is something similar to a wave in the sea, sort of a wavy object. But we need to realize the wave is everywhere. It's not a wave in matter as a wave is at sea, where you have water molecules moving in a way that looks like a wave. The wave is just wave. And this is the helping tools of implicit explicit. It will help you to understand what is a wave. And a good into that, I think, really is the ambigram. And with motion, because motion goes in a little bit towards wave, where particle is less motion-like, that you can say, yeah, it's just. And think of the ambigram. You have a movement there, but you know also this movement is more original than both particle and ordinary wave, like movement. That is behind. That could actually be called the wave. And it's called a hollow movement or hollow flux. The criticism that Graham Priest puts to classical logic is that when you do need contradictions, that won't work in classical physics, because you have taking the Mickey out of the system by misusing it sharply. The law of excluded middle is a misuse of logic. It's nothing but. And it will hurt logic. It will make it work to less extent. And this is exactly the point that Bishop makes to mathematics. Although the law of excluded middle is something that makes mathematics much easier, quicker, you develop an intuition, you will in the long run hurt mathematics. And this is a little bit similar. Yeah, it's almost exactly the same. If you have those extra wheels, I think I mentioned those the other day, when you bicycle. You remember when you learned to ride the bike, you had those extra wheels to help up with the balance. A typical Western invention. I remember I didn't want to get rid of mine. I wasn't happy at all when the suggestion came. Can you take those extra wheels, stödhjul, away? And I think it took me only half a day until I realized, wow, it's so much easier to ride the bike without those things. And actually they hurt the bike riding quite a bit. And I start to wonder, why did my parents let me ride a bike with those horrible things for 5 months, or something like that. I don't know. It's the same with the law of excluded middle. But in this case, it's not only you have some extra support that will hinder your development. It's more like you have an extra support. Yes, you can use it, but don't think it's correct in some way. It's an unlawful thing to do. It's almost correct, but it's not correct. Is underlying principle is misunderstanding. And we need to adjust that misunderstanding, because the whole of mathematics, it doesn't matter what you do, will be hurt because of this. And this has to do with level. Knowledge needs to be embodied. And whereas some people think, well, I'm currently not using the law of excluded middle, so how can that hurt me? Or I only use it with very good caution, I only use it with special cases. Nope. You need to understand it's an unlawful thing to do. And it's leading to paradoxes, but that's not the problem. The problem is you don't have a sound intuition, sound implicit knowledge. So whereas you think you're working with a specific part of mathematics, you actually implicitly have the whole of mathematics in. And this is one of the points David Bohm makes so clear. The wave is ever pervasive. What you are consciously aware is just a little tiny weeny thing. And that's how it should work. It shouldn't be more in the reflective consciousness. It would be overcrowded. But the thing is, you still have to accept that you know all of mathematics at every instance. Every instance you know. You don't get fooled by the reflective consciousness. And there is a lot of stödhjul out there in the world. Oh my God, I need the English word for stödhjul. But one other such stödhjul is of course object. How can it be stödhjul? Yeah, there's loads of languages who doesn't have this stödhjul. And they get along quite well. But they destroy, this stödhjul destroy our intuition. We can still work with object. It's working to some extent between people, but we made mistakes somewhere and they need to be corrected because it's unlawful to have objects. Because in the end, you're gonna go nuts. You're gonna start believing that there are existing things that you will never see, never perceive, never experience. And that's a faux pas if there ever was one. And that will lead to such problems that I'd say maybe is the biggest problem in Western society today. Could actually be. And those things are very similar. You see here, even if you're not interested in mathematics, there is such a clear and excellent example with the law of the excluded middle. So you can transfer this problem to the much more difficult quantum physics, and you will come to realize, oh my God, they are incredibly similar. And this is helping the understanding. It's not particularly sure. It doesn't have to be clear for the conscious mind or reflective consciousness that objects need to be taken out of the picture, or rather need to be understood for what they are. They are stödhjul, they are helping things in our language. Do, for God's sake, you continue to use them. You have to, because they're in language. But don't give them more credit than they deserve. they are crude tools. Actually, the languages who doesn't have objects work a hell of a lot much better. But the thing is, we get into this idea that reflective consciousness is all there is, because that's the only thing that, so to speak, well, the object helps the illusion that the reflective consciousness is all there is. And we lose even more embodiment. Whereas the Indian who doesn't have an object will never fall into that trap. He knows that there are things who hasn't calculations about them, whether they exist or not. This is a confusion. The person knows to exist is the same as being perceived, and you perceive a lot more than the reflective consciousness know about. It's underneath your conscious perception. It's a bit hard to give example of that. Well, I can try. Well, if you feel a very, very faint smoke, you could say it's a fire. But very much underneath that, when you only get like a few molecules of smoke, you still know that's a fire somewhere. By ignoring that, you can lose your life. And that's what most people do today. It's a little bit with object comes very crude, hard identification rules. And people are pointing to each other and say, how can you know that? I need källhänvisning. You have no power to know anything. I think that's the implicit message. How do you know that? You need an authority, you need a källhänvisning, you need a source, you need to have seen it. Those demands comes with object, and they make the whole thing cumbersome, and it leads to delusion that there is something out there we can't see, believe, feel, called knowledge at a distance, or whatever you call it, and that will magnify the problem even more. So you hear, this is a big problem here. And I'd say objects make it so much easier to lose all internal connection and make you less embodied, less in the body. And it will make you not work in a bodily way either. It will make you tense your knees, as I'm doing now, your buttocks, the front of the cheek. Everything will be tense from this Buddhism, because you're shutting out the body. Let the body in. And what happens in the end? I think we lose the connection to the body, then our bodily intelligence won't work, because we have no connection with that. And I think maybe it's somewhere here in this development somebody invented the word intuition. I think it was late 18th century. And intuition is nothing less than happenstance. It's pure coincidence. And I think maybe in the 18th century they noticed that their prediction of becoming progressively worse, because they didn't have the implicit knowledge, because of this development in thinking where the reflective consciousness got stronger and stronger. And then when they understood that their predictions didn't work anymore, they invented intuition. And intuition is like, it's pure chance, saying, I take A or B. Well, I choose B. I trust my intuition. Something like that. Almost like a stödhjul in decision making. Because you ponder your reflective consciousness, you won't come to a conclusion. You feel with your whole system. At least that you can feel. Well, some people don't even feel that. You feel in your internal system something is wrong implicitly, and you invent intuition, and you say, oh, I should be doing intuition instead. I should go with my gut feeling. Well, you don't have any gut feeling anymore, because you lost that in this development. And by saying I'm going to trust my gut feeling won't change everything. You have no contact with your body. Yes, you can develop it. And this can is very sure. There's 100% turnout if you really do the things thoroughly. If you, like Frederick Matthias Alexander said, if you follow these rules, you will succeed in the end. And he didn't mean that as an encouragement. It's not to be taken that. It's a trait of how the Alexander method works. He tried to explain it how it works. It's unfailable because of its structure. So it's pointing to a property in the Alexander technique, not trying to encourage the student. This term has been used in an encouragement way. This is horrible, I think. It's just a statement about the technique so we can know how it works. Very few things in this world are infallible. That we know, and Alexander stated this method is infallible. And that's an important trait in the method. And it helps to understand how it works. There are a few other things that are infallible. Put flour in water and it will turn into dough. That always happens. It's infallible. And that's not because I'm being extremely lucky or that's a miraculous that always says that's going to happen. There are other reasons. The structure of our body is, as Alexander says, it starts, every movement starts with elongating of the spine and widening of the spine. That's the start of every movement. And if you give a direction that does that, that's going to happen. But you need to give other directions before. Let the head be free so the head can go forwards and upwards. Let the neck be free. Let the back longden and widen. That's the working principle of the human body. That's what he meant by that. It's infallible. So there, it's a crux here. Of course, the temptation to use this as an encouragement to students has been too much. And if you get something presented as an encouragement, implicitly you will know this is encouragement. Fine, I believe in the teacher. This helped me to proceed with the directions, but it's not meant to be used this way. And you will lack out on a very, very important clue to how the directions are working. And this is also similar to with the objects. They will lure you to think about, your head will spin in the wrong direction. Could work, yes, most of the cases, having an object instead of the more firmer things, the more realistical things. Having an object could do the job, yes. And we're going to have to continue with objects because we have to communicate with people around us. But they can lure you to believe that there's something you can't see. And that's the problem. And I met people even in Western society who don't believe in existence. But I think it's a trap that is so big it's almost impossible to fall into it. But it's not a necessary thing. I say Håkan, if you met him, he doesn't have the perception of objects. It's obvious when he do things. He doesn't believe in objects. And his perception because of this are very strong. Are your perception from the beginning very, very strong and you have a good connection to your body, I'd say objects would never be a problem. But there is also reason to reverse that statement and look at getting rid of objects will help us get closer to the embodiment. Yes. And oddly enough, this is exactly what David Bohm means. I was so happy when I read that. I think this is all weird. I had no idea that David Bohm was interested in the body and somatics and all that. A few times I've been so happily surprised. And if somebody would have said to me, Hans, I bet you 500 crowns that David Bohm doesn't mention the bodies, I would say, well, I agree. Yes, I'll bet 500 crowns that's true. It turned out not to be true. But we need to understand the wave to understand the concept direction. Well, it's not a concept, it's more a feel. And helping in that is a little bit that you can think about it this way. I don't know, it's helping. You have contradiction in the explicit. They come from a source that's more fundamental, more wholeness. Wholeness doesn't really accept contradictions because they are both in the wholeness. Complementarity. The hollow movement direction is the cause for everything permanent and moving in our world. And it's also the cause of the arrows going up and the arrows going down. Both of those arrows. I think this is a very good point to the wave. Because this is how it looks mathematically. There is a hollow movement. It has the arrow going up and going down. You can also add to the arrows going to the right and the arrows going to the left. That direction takes both those directions. This is very odd. And in some way, it actually reminds me of the Alexander technique. That direction is contradictory in a way. Yeah, it is contradictory. I really think it is in a way. But all the same, it's a more original direction, and it has a definite direction. It has a much more directed thing to it than this arrow I mentioned. We also need to use those arrows, but they're not as firmly directed, even if they seem that way. Another way of thinking about this piece of paper, A4, A4, and you make the Newtonian coordinate system there, and then you also add direction, because you want to know a position of a particle that's moving, you need to add the direction, the trajectory, where it's going. That arrow is smaller in a way. It's not true direction, because this is a piece of paper, and as I mentioned, our take today about reality is like a photograph, completely flat. It's like the hologram. Transfer that idea to a hologram. You understand that directions cannot be the Newtonian directions. True directions need to be in the hologram, in reality. And those directions don't look at all as the ordinary ones. They are more real. They are true directions. Truer, I should say. Truer directions. There you go. They are definitely truer directions. And this, yes, I agree this is weird, but this is going to help to understand the hollow movement and the wave. And today I want to start a little bit with the wave, because one understand a little by little. I think it's a good thing after this to leave it for a couple of days or a week and then return to it. I leave you to it, like directions in the photographic reality. I call that reality level 1. Are not the directions in the hologram, not at all. And remember also when I say our conceptions of the world as a flat, like an A4 arc. It's not literally flat. It can have a third dimension. But on the paper, if I have a direction here, if I cut the paper into 1,000 pieces, that direction won't be there anymore. Whereas in a hologram, if I cut the hologram into 1,000 pieces, the same direction will be in every little piece. I think that makes this a bit very understandable. Well, okay. Sorry about a very complicated lecture, but it needed to be done, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. And let's now see if my head got recorded this time.